Thank you for watching the Abundant Life Family Podcast. I'm Bill.
And I'm Jen.
We're the Hildebrands, and we're helping to build families that last. Today we have a two-parter with Josh and Dixie Paul as we talk about family trauma. Josh, Dixie, it's great to have you guys with us today. We're looking forward to talking about trauma, but hearing about not only your personal story, but how we can help families as they deal with trauma. First of all, let's just talk about you. Tell us about yourselves.
Josh and Dixie Paul. We've been married for how long now?
20 years.
20 years, actually not too long ago, so that's pretty cool. We kind of crossed that bridge of being married more than we've not been married. So we've been together for a while. We've got two kids, 18 and 16, just started college and a junior. And we've been here back in Kansas City for, I think we said almost 8 years now. And been going to Abundant Life for about that long too.
Great.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then professionally, what do you do?
So I'm a psychiatrist. I actually went to med school at UMKC here in town. Did my residency in psychiatry with the Navy, so I was active duty Navy for 8 years, 4 of which was residency, 4 of which serving after that. And then 2017, shifted to reserve, still do reserve, so it's also Commander Paul. And then started working at the VA here in town. So I do specifically a PTSD subspecialty clinic all day, every day. And so it's PTSD all day, every day is what I do. And so it's a heavy line of work, but rewarding.
I imagine.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. And PTSD, when we think of, or when we hear that term, I'm sure a lot of things come to people's minds as they're listening in. They're thinking, ooh, PTSD. So could you tell us like what it is and maybe even what it isn't?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll ask you all a question because I put trauma in, it's a spectrum, right?
Okay.
There's kind of like big trauma, and then there's medium trauma, little trauma, but it's all trauma, and how we respond to it tends to be similar, but just scaled differently. So I'll ask, have you been in a car accident before or something like that? Have you all been in a car accident?
I was.
Yeah.
It was just a minor one, and I had my two oldest boys, but they were little in car seats.
Okay.
And so to me, actually anything trauma related is because my kid has blood coming down his hand or something, and my wife is like, oh, cool, and she's trying to work on it, and I'm going, I think I'm going to faint,
out.
Yeah, it's the old fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Exactly.
Oh, man. We woke up one morning, we were awakened by our son who fell off the top bunk, gashed his head, and you could see skull in there, all right? And so my wife is going, oh, that's cool. He had 2 layers of stitches, inner and outer. So, and I'm going, I'll stay with the other kids.
So would you consider, so for Bill, that was big T trauma. There's that varying degree of trauma.
How we respond to it is very personal, right?
It is.
And I don't think there is like this is this and this is this.
Yeah.
I think it's very personal to us. But I think we all have a pretty similar response in that, like, after those things happen, you get a little skittish, right? Like, the old, I don't know that I want to drive again. Like, I got rear-ended, 5 years ago or something like that in the rain. And for the better part of 6 months, every time I was driving in the rain and hitting my brakes, I'm like, is somebody coming up behind me, that sort of thing. You just kind of develop this assumption that because something happened, it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
And so I think there's kind of a continuum of that.
Okay.
What have you noticed when you've had trauma in your life? Like, what other things come up that's pretty universal?
I think, you get scared, and so you kind of keep that at bay. So not wanting to drive, like you were saying, things like that. Like, you keep it at bay so as not to let it happen again, as much as I can control and protect.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think that's pretty universal, even for big T, little t kind of traumas. PTSD itself, we kind of have a set of diagnostic criteria for it. And it starts with, obviously, exposure to trauma. That has to be where it starts. And that's something that could be deadly or loss of life or serious injury or even sexual in nature. And it can be something that happened to you. It could be something that you witnessed. It can be something... actually, in the newer diagnostic criteria, there's kind of this verbiage of like, if you heard about something happening to somebody that you love and are very close to, that can kind of count too. And then there's kind of clusters of symptoms that go along with PTSD. There's the re-experiencing symptoms, that's either nightmares, unwanted memories, flashbacks, those kind of things. I kind of call that the defining characteristic of PTSD. That's usually what's different between somebody that just has trauma and they're dealing with it and somebody who has PTSD as a disorder, is this like intrusive recollections of that event. And then there's avoidance symptoms. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to be around things that remind me of it, and I'm going to avoid those things. I call that the driver of PTSD. It kind of keeps it going. And then there's the distortions of PTSD, which are kind of negative thoughts of the world is inherently unsafe. I'm unlovable. I'm broken. There's guilt and shame going along with what happened to me. It's my fault. You know, those kind of things that are lies that kind of creep in. And then there's what I call the disabling symptoms of PTSD, which are the kind of the hypervigilance symptoms. So it's that jumpiness, fearfulness, irritability, not being able to sleep very well. Like those things can really take root and cause major problems with people and with work and with those kind of things. So those are kind of the clusters. And then it has to go on for a month to be diagnosable. So that's PTSD as a diagnosis.
Okay.
But then there's, like we were talking about, a spectrum of maybe you're not quite there, but you kind of have some of those things. And I think how you approach it ends up being pretty similar, regardless of where you're at. Yeah.
So when somebody goes to a restaurant and they get bad service and they think, I'm not going back to that place, PTSD, you know.
Sure.
Oh, brother.
We do. As a society, I think we get a little flippant with the term at times.
Sure.
I don't want to diminish anybody's experience of anything because, we kind of joke about it. But, that was a traumatic flight or had a traumatic discussion with a mother-in-law, father-in-law, or, like those kind of things. And I think we're saying it was difficult, and I don't want to do it again, but it probably isn't in that same vein, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And it's your own perspective.
Sure. Now, for some people, maybe that is a very, very big deal, and it becomes something that they get stuck on and can't get off of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That can happen.
I know that I always associated PTSD with more of the military, that I feel, and I could be wrong, but I feel like that's kind of where that term came from. And I think it's been really helpful to understand that, even, we all now can have symptoms of PTSD and trauma. And that's kind of where we want to settle today is
even if you weren't in the military, just this example that one of our sons went to the Chiefs celebration after the last Super Bowl.
He was there.
And he was 20 yards away from the shooter when they started shooting.
And was talking about it. So, yeah, and I think that's, I think it's so good that, we're going to be talking about how this affects everyone. It affects our families deeply. And so I would love to just hear, and I really appreciate Dixie being here today and just really being willing to be vulnerable and really to share your experience with trauma in your own home. And, we've been praying for you, Dixie, because it's not easy to share all that, but we really appreciate you being here and sharing a little bit about that. So,
Okay.
I
get a little emotional, guys.
know.
It's okay. Yeah, so for me, it's from the beginning. My mom just was lost in whatever that word can mean in all of the ways. And so she couldn't handle being a mom, I think. And so she very quickly just gave up all of that. And even my father, same way. They will tell a story about they took me to see him. And he took one look at me and said, "No, thank you." Direct quote, and so knowing that those people that are supposed to love you from the very beginning looked at you and said no. And my family just being very open with that, right or wrong, I don't know to this day, but they were very open. And so my entire life I've known these things, and you kind of then start to think, hey, there's something so wrong with me that just one look makes you think I don't want any part of her, and so that affects every part of your life.
Yeah.
And it gets worse, my mom wanting to potentially trade me for a boy, so again, it's just so much rejection there. And then she would come back into our lives and leave and come back and leave. And you were just left traumatized every time. And at first it was because I'm never going to see her again. Is she going to come back? Is she going to love me? And then it turned into, is she going to come back and try to take me? And so it was like you're traumatized in two different ways by the same person.
Right. What were
for
you
years.
feeling? You say I was feeling traumatized by that. What was happening inside that, as that girl? What kind of were you feeling?
There was, so much. But there's a lot of that there is something wrong with me. And I didn't know what it was, but there was something wrong. And so that was always there from the time I was little up until today. There's still always that thought of there's something so wrong. And I don't know what it is, but I've got to fix it. I've got to change it. I've got to hide it. And then there's just, what it leaves you with is, man, everybody's going to leave me at some point. And so always being afraid that people are going to remove their love from you to the point where you just keep them far enough away that it hurts, but it's survivable now, which is not a way to live. Right. But that is what you're left with, are kind of the big things I can think of.
Yeah, and we were discussing that on the way over. Like, I don't know that she ever had a diagnosable PTSD because I don't know that you really ever had like that intrusive, like memories, recollections of certain things. But she did have some of the distorted thinking that goes along with it.
Yeah, sure.
Some of the, even some of the hypervigilance, anxiety stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and avoidance. I don't want to deal with it or to talk about it.
Yes.
She had one particular trauma that I didn't find out about until we were married, like 10, 12 years, something like that. I think, like, we'd never talked about it.
Yeah, when I was also younger, and it kind of plays into, it's a narrative I think I gave myself, but when you talk about it, it just makes sense. But, when you are discarded, essentially, by those people who are supposed to love you, you become almost like trash or something that can be used and tossed aside. And so I did have somebody very close to me who did sexually abuse me for many years. And it was like they could, because who was going to care? Who was going to do anything? But what that does, when it starts when you're 4 or 5 and goes on for several years, then when you get older, you just continue with that. And so that's all I am to people. And I let them think that way. But then they do treat me that way. So then it gets confusing and you're like, wait, no, I do deserve that. No, I don't deserve that. And it's just this cycle that repeats and repeats, and then there's been death has just been something that's also surrounded me. That sounds bad, sorry. But it has happened a lot, and that has nothing to do with me. People die, and I know that. But what it does when you already have all of this is it makes you, hey, that person also left you. Hey, that person also left you. And then you just keep going to where everyone's going to leave. So just be done, whatever that looks like. And I think, it's a lot.
That definitely was her way of coming at life for a long time. Like, I'm going to keep you at arm's distance because
It's
if you get
safer
too
for both
close,
of
then
us.
you can leave me again. And I'm not going to let you have that power.
Yeah.
She's come a long way in that regard, though.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Just listening to your story, I feel some of the same thoughts because Even though when my dad walked out on our family, he looked at me in the eye and said, "It's not because of you, I just don't love your mother anymore." But still,
Yep.
you always feel like,
Sure.
what part of this is my fault? If
Yeah.
I'd have done this differently, if I'd have
Yes.
done that differently.
Yes.
And so rejection, abandonment, I
Absolutely.
understand, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're hard things to fight and work through, especially, as a child. What did that look like? How could I get through it? And then to not get help then, it just carried right over into being an adult and being a wife and being a mother. And it's always a journey, is what I tell people. There's never been a day where I'm like, hey, I'm better now. And I don't have these issues and I'm not worried about it. No, each day is different. And each day I have to wake up and know the things that are true. And what I've done and what I know that can help me, but it's a decision each day to make, which sometimes feels hopeless because there just is no end in sight. But when you look back at your story and where you've come from, you can see that, and it does then. I can do this. I can keep going. I can put in the work.
That's right.
And so, yeah, it has been a journey, but it's been hard. Yeah.
So tell us, Dixie, because you are so joyful, complete joy, such a pleasure to be around. And you talk about this journey. And journeys are often really difficult, but they're beautiful. And so I would just love to hear. So we heard, the things that were traumatizing as a child, but you talk about this journey. Where did that turn come? And what did that look like? And because where do you get this joy?
Yeah.
That's so amazing and so evident.
Goodness, I feel like we would both even have different answers to this. But for me, nothing really changed at all until I was 17. And that is when I met the Lord. And that there was a shift then because, somebody shared with me this verse in Romans where it talks about there's nothing that can separate me from the love of Christ Jesus. And to me, that was huge because that was a written promise that there's nothing, height, depth, angels, demons, there's nothing that can separate me from the love of Jesus. Right. And that was the first time I had a promise that I felt like would be kept. And that was pivotal. That was huge. And so there were changes then, but I think it really took about 10 years after that.
Okay.
So I was about 27 at that point. We had 2 kids. We had moved in the military for the first time, so we're away from everyone we know. And there was just, I think, desperation maybe. I could feel myself so low, and I didn't know how to get out of it. And so there was just a continual crying out to the Lord and essentially punishing Josh for nothing that he did, but I was lost and scared and confused. And there was just a day where I just had this realization that, hey, I have to forgive. I have to forgive people that haven't asked for forgiveness, that honestly don't deserve it. In my head, that's what I felt. They didn't deserve it, but I have to forgive them because all that I've been doing is living in this space of this happened to me and this was done to me, and that's why I behave the way I do. And it's not wrong. Those things did happen and they were terrible. But as long as I stay there, I'm making that choice. And so I had to choose to forgive and then take steps forward. And so from there, just doing the work, finding the good things in life, realizing, hey, God has been so sweet to give me a husband and 2 kids that even my own children, I have kept at arm's length because I just don't know when that day is. When they're like, we don't love mommy, we don't like mommy, mommy's not nice, irrational because they do love their mom. But in my head, that's what it was. And so, it was kind of all of that together and having that realization that I do have power here that I didn't feel like I did. Someone else controlled the narrative is what I thought. No, I get to. I get to play a part in that. And that was when really things started to turn. And I was like, hey, this life is sweet and beautiful. And I can't believe what I've been gifted and that I get to be a part of. And so that's when things really started to shift. And then I started putting in the work and doing the hard things that left me where I am now.
I want to hear the specifics of the hard things that you had to do to heal, to bring into that. But first, I want to kind of step back into the muck and the mire just a little bit. Not that it's just your muck and mire, but the people listening, maybe they didn't relate to you or even me with divorce or death or abandonment or whatever. But what are some other big T traumas? There's different, like you said, there's at least 3 different levels of trauma, but there's probably all sorts of colors and variations, shades between that. But big traumas, what are some other examples of big traumas that people face?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty common that we all lose loved ones, right? I think the death rate is 100%.
That's right.
Yes, it is.
We all die at some point. And so it's inevitable that you're going to have family members or loved ones that die. There's, terminal diagnoses that come up.
That's right.
Where you kind of end up having to go through that grief before the loss in some ways, right? There's obviously...
Diagnoses even like, would this be major, a big T with one of our sons was diagnosed with teenage male anorexia.
I mean, for us, that was very...
For him,
And
for
for him.
us, for his brothers, that's a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
A learning disorder might be a little smaller, but it's still life
It just
affecting
depends.
and
I
changing.
Sure.
A move to Kenya, taking our 4 boys and uprooting them from all family, from all friends,
Yeah.
to them, and living there for 6 years, developing new friends, and then moving back
Yeah.
after they've been rooted for 6 more years. Those are all big T traumas.
Sure.
What about small t? What are some ideas or examples that might be, people might think, I don't really have much trauma in my life. But yet if you add up these little t's,
Yeah.
the little t's add up.
They stack. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
they
definitely
do.
Stack, yeah.
Sure. And I don't know that I really distinguish all that much.
Okay.
Like what's big, what's little. I think it's really more how much is it affecting you
Yeah.
that
That's
I look
so
at.
good. Yeah.
Because that's where I live in my
Yeah.
job is like, let's find ways to make it affect you less.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it could be any number of things.
I think about in our own family with our children. It was, Dad being in the military came with a move every few years.
Yeah.
And while that doesn't sound like a big deal to children who have moved 2 to 3 years
Yep.
consistently, they start over every time. You don't have anyone around. And so there were times that was, I would say, little t. And then I think when you deployed, he's deployed a few times. That was, I know you weren't there for that, but I will tell you that was
hard.
traumatic for them. Absolutely. Was
Daddy's
it?
going where? Is
Right.
Daddy coming back?
Yes. And then
Yeah.
they don't watch the news, but all of a sudden they want to turn on the TV and see, is there anything to know?
Yeah.
Because they've just heard enough. And then living in military areas, kids will share things they know, and then their brains start to spiral, and I'm never going to see my dad again, and things like that. And that for them was traumatic. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Or we even, my mom just lost her dog of 11 years.
Yeah.
Was that yesterday or
2 days
day
ago.
before yesterday?
Yeah.
Which we kind of joke, we're not very strong into our pet love, but I mean, it's been a big deal for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A big deal for her. She has told us multiple times she's a big mess right now.
Even among 4 boys,
Yeah.
each kid is going to react differently to a pet dying or a
whenever it's
caterpillar getting squished by a brother.
Yeah. All those things.
I even think kids in school, the things that happen throughout the day, the things they see, they're witness to, can turn into those traumas. Our kids can bring things home that in my head is something we could work through, but their experience is different and they had that firsthand. And so I do think it does depend on the person, what it looks like, but there's a lot, I think, of little traumas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. This life stinks. It just does.
It's hard.
Like, we live in a fallen world, right?
Yeah.
Where the paradigm is that sin drives the bus. And in that, there's bad things that happen.
Yeah.
And there's suffering, there's death, there's pain, there's all of those different things. And I don't think any of us get out of it unscathed.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
I think we're all subject to that. Again, on different levels and how much it affects us. But I think you don't get to walk away clean
Right.
out
That's
of this
right.
world.
That's right.
I want to go back to a little bit of Dixie's story as we kind of finish up. You were talking about the journey, and what I'm hearing is that the journey began when you started to understand what was happening in your life and maybe why you were responding and reacting the way, and you realized, I get to make that decision. Yes. And that is so powerful, Dixie. Tell us just a couple things before we finish up. What are some of those great decisions that you made that gave you the hope and the joy that we see so evidently from you today?
Yeah, I have to give credit where credit is due there.
Yeah.
I did marry a psychiatrist, and so he's offered.
I wasn't when we got married.
No,
That's just kind of.
but he's offered a lot of help, and so some of the things was you have to talk about it. You have to find appropriate ways to talk about it, because when we keep it in, shame builds, and that shame is not ours. It's not on us. We don't need to have that. And so you have to find appropriate ways and the appropriate people to share that with. And that was big, to learn to talk about it. And now I'm open, but to get to that point took a lot of work. And then just a lot of things were learning to not run.
Yeah.
So when things are tough or hard, you run away. It's easier. It's safer for you. I can survive if I can get out of this situation, which is an over-dramatization, just to be clear. Nothing was unsurvivable, I don't think. But you have to learn not to run. And that came with learning how to make slow, appropriate decisions, not rash. Learning how to have prompts of things to think through and pray through, and who to talk to about it before you ever make even a simple decision.
Yes.
Because I'm doing it out of trauma and fear.
Yeah.
And so those were kind of the big things that I had to learn to do.
And I don't think you can undervalue. So that moment, she talked about it earlier, of choosing forgiveness over bitterness.
Yeah.
Was really the turning point in her walk, I think. Because, and it's so true, I deal with this all the time. Most people that come to me, it's the world is the problem, not me. And it takes a good amount of humility to, one, say, I do have an issue here, and I need to work on this. I need to change the way that I'm looking at things and the way I'm thinking about things and the way I'm coming at things. Because I think it's real easy to just say, I'm justified in how I am. I've earned this, and so, but you can't change when you're that way.
That's right.
And so that was a huge moment that put her on a different trajectory.
Yeah.
There is so much good and deep things that are happening here, and I'm super excited because we are going to have a second episode with you guys, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into more of a broad way of how trauma affects our family. Dixie, thank you for sharing with us a little bit about your experience in trauma. And I think you were the one who said that if you find yourself stuck in the muck, you got to get up, you got to get out, and you have to get help.
Yes.
And I'm so thankful for that. And we're going to see you back on the next episode really soon.
Yeah.
We'll be there.
We're excited.
Yay.
All right. Let's close in a word of prayer.
Okay.
Lord, as we come to you now, thank you for opening this session up, talking about trauma. So I pray that you just continue to help us talk through solutions and how you can bring health and healing. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.
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 Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Abundant Life Family Podcast. If you found this helpful for your family, hit like and subscribe below. And feel free to drop a comment or question below. To learn more about the Abundant Life Family Ministry and the 10-mile markers to help you win at building families that last, go to our website at livingproof.co/family.